So what we were talking about was a variety of things. Of course, if I don't look at the paper, I'm not going to remember anything. Sorry about that. Thank you. One of the things that seemed to be interesting was there was a lot of silence at our table because the questions seemed to be a bit challenging. Not badly challenging, just a bit challenging. But we said that by and large, most of us had not experienced anything like what happened with Sarah and Abraham. I had had some experiences with Mom and some of the senior people that lived with her. And some of us may have had faith-based experiences that caused us to do something personally. I know I spoke about some of the events in my life that
Can everybody hear?
do that.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Among other things, it was when I was in my 10th year of my Army career in Washington, D.C., and I felt called by God to leave the Army, and at first I thought I was going to be called to be an Episcopal priest, but it turned into something else. But the Episcopal Church was a large part of what, steered me out of the Army into whatever I did next. And then coming here to be with Mom and Dad and moving into teaching because of 9/11, and then being with Mom until her passing, all of that, God played a role in my life in all of those things. And then explaining to another parishioner what it means for growing faith in God's Son, Jesus Christ, one of the things that was said is that it's really the living faith, it's living the faith in our lives that brings it out, makes it, meaningful and brings it to bear. And growing faith also, to some extent, talking about how seniors who have held on to a strong faith all their lives are less worried about what happens next. They're less worried about death. They're less worried about other things. And more understanding that they're going to be with Christ in one way or another. Have we had examples of experienced faith in Christ growing in our own lives and in someone else's life? And I think that was true. I saw it in my mom as she progressed up to her 100th year. And I experienced it in my own. And I believe we've shared that we experienced that by interacting with other people, right? At the church and in this kind of an environment where we have a chance to see the faith growing. And then D was depending on private worship or worship and private prayer. We all agree that's important, but we also talked about things like Bible study, making ourselves available in something like tonight, where we're doing more than just Sunday worship and private prayer. And in my own case, I've gone through a series of experiences and training that all have deepened my insight in being in touch with God and with the Holy Spirit. So it's not just worship and private prayer, though those are really important. Did I miss anything?
No.
Folks, because we got so involved in the discussions that I didn't take any notes. But we very quickly got into to talking about family and what it is for children to bring them along, and considered jumped off with a discussion of the evangelical aspect of growing faith by sharing it with others, and that sharing it is mostly what we talked about in the different ways that we do, I think, with our families, with strangers, and with others. All of the various things that the ministries of our church here and in our life. Then there was a discussion of, I think we can say we developed the idea that if you're going to be a Christian, you're going to, the Spirit doesn't grow unless you share it. If you go put it in the closet, basically, it'll die just like any other plant, in a sense, if we don't share it. And then we had we talked about the various ways, I think we could summarize what we said at the table about Abraham and Sarah would be that never shortchange the idea of what God can do. It's not something it's not limited by our simple perceptions. It's way beyond what we can imagine if we just let it go. Examples of how you've experienced faith in your own life. Well, each one of us at the table, and most interesting was the idea that it goes in fits and spurts, and that you don't grow necessarily in a straight line. There are many changes, there are many stumbling blocks, many of which we make ourselves. But by diligent application of a moral life of our own, either to our children by quiet example. You can't preach at them, beat it into their heads. They have to see their parents living that kind of a life. The same token, people who come here to the church, people who see Gina working out on the flowers and come and at least ask. In that sense, not hiding the light under a basket, to borrow another. And I think that's probably as close as we got to dealing with those aspects. Some of us talked about times we know that God has intervened in our life and we don't really recognize it until that time or sometime later. I've certainly had a couple of those experiences. And I'd say that's about it. Because it became a very personal, and I think that's the growing faith. It is the personal aspect of the thing which matters most.
Thanks.